Welcome to Building the Future, hosted by Kevin Horick. With millions of listeners a month, Building the Future has quickly become one of the fastest rising programs, with a focus on interviewing startups, entrepreneurs, investors, CEOs, and more. The radio and TV show airs in 15 markets across the globe, including Silicon Valley. For full showtimes, past episodes, or to sponsor the show, please visit buildingthefutureshow.com.
Do you have an app idea that you've been dreaming about but don't know how to actually start building it? Use Bubble. I've been using Bubble for a number of years now. It's an extremely powerful no-code platform that enables you to build, launch, and scale real products without investing thousands of dollars on engineers, designers, or spending time trying to code it yourself. Use Bubble's visual drag and drop tool to create really anything from marketplaces, SaaS products, and so much more. Join over 2 million people, including myself, already using Bubble to launch and grow businesses. Welcome back to the show. Today we have Andrew Smith. He's the founder at VRRB. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Kevin.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show. I think what you guys are doing is actually really innovative and cool. But before we get into all that, let's get to know you a little bit better and start off with where you grew up.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born and raised in Miami, Florida, which
Very
is also where I live now.
Sure.
I did a couple of stints across the country, spent a couple of years in Denver, Colorado, and then almost a decade, actually just over a decade in Los Angeles, all over sort of the LA metro area, everywhere from South Orange County to North Valley, and a couple stops in between.
Okay, very cool. So walk us through your education. What did you take and why?
So I'm largely self-educated, at least as a programmer and engineer.
Sure.
When I was in 7th grade, my technology teacher at the time at Cutler Ridge Middle School, which I believe is now called Cutler Bay Middle School, handed me a book, the C programming language, and basically told me you should learn this.
Wow.
I was, very fast typer. I was into technology. I loved computers. I loved MMORPG games. I loved first-person shooter games. Counter-Strike was pretty big at the time. As was like Diablo and some other very popular games from when I was growing up. So, he kind of saw that in me, saw that I was bored a lot in school with kind of just your typical curriculum, and handed me this book and basically told me to learn it and said it was going to be important. So I did. I was, 14 years old at the time, started programming, never really did much like interesting stuff in C, but did a lot of silly projects in it.
No, that's very cool. Yeah, I got lucky too, because when I was 12, our teacher was showing us like HTML, and this was like mid-90s, like very early. And it was just like, wow, this is cool, right? So I totally have like a similar story. I think that's cool. So walk us through your career up into VRRB and then coming up with the idea for it. And then let's dive into that.
Yeah, so I really kind of got my start in the fintech overlap, which really isn't it's actually not accurate. It's more of like the systematic trading strategy side of things. Okay. So when I was 19 years old, I didn't want to go to college anymore. I dropped out. I had a nice little portfolio. I was mostly trading like foreign exchange and commodity futures.
Okay.
Joined a couple of prop groups, found them to be like sort of kind of scammy, and was like, okay, this is not really like the path I want to go down. But had done okay in trading, or at least what I thought was, but just wanted more capital to work with. So literally just started dialing and sending out resumes to a bunch of hedge funds that a buddy of mine worked for a big hedge fund registry. And he was like, look, I'm going to help you out. And I'll give you this list, and then you can do whatever you want with that. So literally just started dialing. I finally got a job. This is what took me to Denver with smaller funds, like 100 million in assets under management, focused on foreign exchange and commodities, called Trident Asset Management. The founder was based out of Connecticut, but I guess also had a house in Aspen, but I wasn't going to move to Aspen. So I was 19 years old, wanted to be at least somewhat in a city. So ended up working it out to move to Denver, worked remotely. So this is way before work from home was a thing. So I've been doing this basically my whole career. did okay, made some money, lost some money. Eventually found it was kind of time to move on. Didn't want to be in such like a volatile space. Wanted to either do my own thing or have at least some degree of stability. So I ended up moving to Newport Beach to work for what was effectively a PIMCO offshoot. It was a group of guys who'd worked at PIMCO called Anfield Capital Management. Worked with them for a while. I was sort of just a contractor, but helping them with like the technological side of managing their funds. And then did that for like a year and a half before I met my co-founder of my first startup.
Okay. So how did you come up with the idea for Verb, and what exactly is it?
So the original idea for Verb started in 2017 during the ICO boom. I know that sounds like, oh, I just wanted to make money. It was actually because like Ethereum didn't scale and it was obvious. Like fees would spike during the ICO boom. Whenever there was a big ICO that people wanted in on, it just became unusable. I owned a lot of ETH at the time. I became a big fan of Ethereum, and like when I first heard about it, it really spoke to me. I got Bitcoin in a lot of ways. I like sort of consider myself an amateur economist, very Austrian school sort of oriented. And there's this theory in the Austrian school called regression theorem, which Ludwig von Mises wrote about, I guess, in like the 20s or 30s, which basically states that all money comes from originally a commodity use case. So if you take gold and silver, and even the US dollar, which was backed by gold and silver, and most monies that had any degree of sustainability over time came from what was originally a commodity use case. I didn't see that in Bitcoin. And at the time, there was really no programmability layer. So it didn't quite click for me, which I hate to admit. Would have been great if it did. But yeah, it just never quite clicked for me. I was like, it's cool, it's interesting technology. It's like at the time, everybody thought it was like a way to remain anonymous and private. Turns out it's like actually quite the opposite. Everything's very public, so it's very easy to trace and track. I thought there were like some cool aspects to it, but never clicked for me. Ethereum clicked right away. Like the idea of this like decentralized computer where you could program and like execute programs on it, and you could have like, I kind of think of it very much as sort of like functions as a service, like you know, event triggered transfers of tokens and whatever kind of value you want. And the native token had a commodity use case. It was a compute credit, effectively, right? You needed to use it. It was the gas model that Ethereum implements. Really spoke to me. So started buying as early as I could. I think my dollar cost average ended up being about $12. Did really, really well on that. Did sell a lot of it at like 300. So I paper handed it a little bit. But when you have a 30x return on something, you got to take some profits, right?
100%.
Yeah, like 30x was my return on it. I did really, really well on Ethereum. I love Ethereum still. Like, I think everything in this space that's building a smart contract platform, and even to a degree, like what they're doing with ordinals and inscriptions, is building on the shoulders of Ethereum in a way. So still a big fan. It just doesn't scale. And that's a problem if you want it to be global and everybody to use it, and for it to be like people talk about Ethereum becoming the global settlement layer. It just basically that was the idea for Verb. Is it didn't scale. We needed something that offered this similar type of platform, but that scaled. And then it kind of evolved a little bit over time. Like Solana came out. Solana obviously is somewhat scalable. It has some potential, you know, some issues. They keep claiming they're going to fix it with the outages and all of that. And they might, you know, and I trust there's a lot of really, really smart people that work at Solana. I trust they will get it right. But what effectively happened was, as I went down this rabbit hole of looking into like, okay, like how can we build a really scalable system in this space and offer up the programmability component that Ethereum does, I started to realize like how poor the developer experience was, and like coming from the data science, AI, Web 2 space, it just you're chewing glass a lot, right? So
Yeah.
the developer experience in Web 3 is not great. I wanted to solve that, and that became like a real big mission of mine. And we can talk about, you know, how we do that. I'm sure we will. But that was kind of the evolution of Verb. It really started as an idea of like, okay, we need something that scales, that's similar to Ethereum, but, you know, can handle global traffic. and evolved over time to, yes, we need that, but we also need a much better developer experience if we want to find killer use cases.
Okay, so let's dive into that. How are you making that developer experience easier? Because as somebody that's done some of this dev in some of the chains you mentioned, yeah, it's not easy.
Yeah, it's chewing glass. So the first thing is we have a language agnostic platform. So that knocks down a huge barrier right off the bat. You can come build in JavaScript, build in Python, build in Go, build in C, C++, Rust if you're a systems guy, TypeScript, and eventually we'll add more. We will make it Solidity compatible as well. There's a little work left to do to quite figure that out, but we've got some really good ideas about how we're going to go about doing that. And the way that we do that is with something called a unikernel. And basically what a unikernel is it's like a very, very small virtual machine and operating system. I like to refer to it as like a container on steroids, which is not like actually the most accurate description of it, but it gets the picture across.
Sure.
So you get a lot of the isolation benefits that you get from containerization. It's a lot faster though to boot up than a container would be. And you get you just get a lot more flexibility from a developer experience perspective because you can effectively pull down from a registry somewhere all of the runtime libraries to run that one program. So basically what a unikernel means is an operating system for one application. That's really like at the core of it, what the definition of it is. It is all the very bare minimum necessary runtime libraries for one program. And then you can automate that process of pulling them down and packaging them together. So that's step number one. There's a lot of other things that we do to improve the developer experience around tooling and around our SDK and exposing APIs that just make the process a lot more comfortable for developers, without having to burden them with security concerns. So because of both the unikernel and then also like the way that we compile and expose only certain system calls and certain system interfaces, we're able to create much greater isolation, much greater security in the design of our program. Our programs are also stateless. So data goes in, data comes out, nothing changes in the program, which also reduces the attack surface and lowers the security burden on the developer. So those are really like at a high level how we accomplish a much better developer experience. It's also modular. So this is not something that's going to be just unique to our chain, although the compute nodes in our network will settle the fees that they earn on our chain, and it'll be the first place where this is deployed. But this can, in theory, go anywhere and be a part of any chain. It could be a layer 3 on top of layer 2s on Ethereum. It could be, a layer 2 or layer 3 on top of other chains. It could be a part of the stack on all of these various modular chains coming out like Celestia and Dimension. And we're very open to that. We are not maxis here at VRRB, even though we do believe what we're building is better. We don't like the sort of cultish tribal, this weird like political affiliation almost with a chain where like people get angry if you're using a different chain, and like, no, use whatever chain best suits you. What we want to do is make it easier to onboard developers. That's our mission. We don't have enough developers in Web3.
No. Interesting. Okay. So, well, I guess why do you think there's not enough developers in Web3? And maybe for people that don't know, what does Web3 mean? Because it's kind of a buzzword.
Yeah, it's a buzzword. Yeah. There's fragmented definitions. Okay, so a lot of people look at Web3 like this. Web 1 was read only.
Yeah.
Web 2 was read write. Web 3 is read write own.
Sure.
So that ownership component. I don't necessarily agree with that definition in whole. I think that's a part of it. The way I look, and both of us are old enough to remember the old days of the internet.
Yep.
So the way that I look at it is Web 1 was decentralized with low availability and slow.
Yeah.
Web 2 was centralized with high availability and fast. Web 3 is decentralized with high availability and fast. That's the way that I really look at it, or at least where it should go. We're not there yet, but that's where it should go.
Okay. So why do you think then there's such a lack of developers? Because no code's getting a lot easier. So like myself as a designer, that's been game changing for me, right? And trying to figure out, and there's some really good tools out there that I'm a terrible coder. So like, the no code tools have been game changing for me. So why do you think there's been such a shortage? Because, and then let's talk about the AI stuff kind of later.
Yeah. So there's 20 million developers in the world. They're obviously fragmented across different language,
Sure.
and then different use cases, right? But roughly 20 million developers in the world. There's about 30,000 in Web3 when you include both part and full time. If you include one-time developers who just came and tried it, you could probably boost that number up to maybe close to 100,000, but that'd be really stretching it.
Sure.
There's like people who like took a Udemy course and like built a smart contract as part of a tutorial, right? So, by the way, nothing against Udemy. I've used it myself. I love it, and it's a great way to learn things.
Totally.
But you need to really be like a Web3 developer. You need to be a little bit more seasoned than that. So part of it is just the language barrier, right? You step into Web3 and you either need to know Solidity or Rust, or if you want to go with like Fuel, you need to learn Sway, or you want to go with Sui or Aptos, you need to learn Move. It's like we're building the freaking Tower of Babylon over here. Like everybody's got their own language. Yeah. And for some reason, none of the VCs that have funded any of these have ever stopped and thought to ask, is there a actual legitimate reason why you need another language, right? They just don't ask that. Like, cool, here's the money, go and build it. So I think part of it is just like this massive language barrier and like fragmentation across all these various languages. And where Solidity is not necessarily a difficult language to learn, like syntactically, or to understand like how you build functions or how you construct a contract. Like I think you can pick that up pretty quickly, but there's a lot of foot guns in Solidity where you can either like under optimize for gas and it becomes prohibitively expensive to use your smart contract, or where you can do something wrong and it becomes easily exploited. And we've seen lots of exploits in Ethereum. So I think that's a part of it. Then on the other side, like Rust is probably the second most popular language for smart contracting across a variety of ecosystems. Well, Rust is a systems language that I'm a huge fan of Rust. We're building Verb in Rust, like the back end of Verb is built in Rust. It's a very difficult language to learn. There's a really steep learning curve, amongst the steepest learning curves, if not the steepest. I would even argue, like, aside from the foot guns in C, Rust is probably harder to learn. I think C is probably harder to master, but Rust is maybe more frustrating to learn because of the borrow checker and the compiler complaints and all of that stuff. It does take a little bit longer to get used to. So like C will just let you do stuff and then you'll find out about it months later, right? So like your program will just crash and you'll have no clue why, then you have to go and debug it. So Rust won't allow you to do some of those things. So I think it's better in a lot of ways, but maybe more difficult to learn. There's about 250,000 Rust developers. I would argue that maybe 90% of them are systems guys working on like very low level systems projects, converting what used to be written in C into Rust.
Okay.
And then a big chunk of those are also like distributed systems guys. The concurrency benefits you get from Rust really suits distributed systems really, really well. So those aren't app people. I'm not an app guy myself, right? You're more of an app guy. You're more of a UI UX, like let's build high quality product that people actually want to use. A lot of the people in Web3 are systems people. They're brilliant. They're almost too brilliant for their own good in a lot of ways, right? And I think we've surrounded ourselves in this echo chamber of geniuses who want to do things that like appeal to other geniuses. Well, the fact of the matter is, like, most people don't speak that language and they're just never going to get it.
Yeah, that's interesting, actually. Okay, keep going. Sorry.
No, yeah. So that's really kind of, I think there's this language barrier. There's a tooling barrier for sure.
Yeah.
So like, even when you learn the language, you then need to learn like all these frameworks around it for how you actually deploy things, how you test things, everything else, which is not what you were using when you're coming over from Web 2. And then the third part of it is, and I think you'll be able to relate to this, is like, frankly, like a lot of developers have good jobs and are lazy, right? So why are they going to go in their evenings, spend 6-9 months, a year, like learning this other thing when they're making $250,000 working at Google? Like, you're just not going to do it. Why would you? And I don't blame you for not doing it. If you could do it in a weekend, hack something together, and now you have a prototype, that's a different story. And I think that can potentially lead us into like where AI is now. I've got a background in data science. I would love to kind of talk about that and make the comparison of the journeys.
Okay, let's do that, because I have some thoughts, but let's keep going.
So if you think back to like 06, 07,
Yep.
data science was very difficult. You had no,
Totally.
like scikit-learn came out in 07. I don't remember exactly when TensorFlow and Keras came out, but it was later. And then, OpenCV and PyTorch and PySpark and like all of these Python libraries that made data science, they didn't exist back then. So
Totally. Yeah.
if you were trying to build something, a machine learning algorithm, you had to understand intimately the math, the algorithms, and the programming, right? Or you had to work amongst a consortium that knew it.
Which is incredibly difficult to do.
Yes. Yes. And as a result, there were roughly 3,000 data scientists in the world.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So fast forward half a decade, 7 years, all of these tools have now come out, right? And a lot of them are in the V1, so they're not great, but you don't need to know the math anymore. You now still kind of need to understand the algorithms. You need some domain expertise on how you like feature engineer and things like that. But you definitely don't need to know the math anymore, right? You can just import the math. So it just made life a lot easier. It made it a lot quicker to prototype things.
Yeah.
And you could see very quickly if you were onto something. Fast forward to earlier this year, now you don't even need to know any of that. You need to know how to import a Python package and save an API key in your .env file, and you can build AI apps thanks to OpenAI and Hugging Face and some of these others.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of it, you could just like tell it what you wanted to write. You just
that's true.
Give me this. I want code that does this. Generate. Try it. Oh, nope. Generate. Oh, this one works.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah. You can actually have the AI self-generate for you next things that you want to build, which is really powerful. As a result of that, and I'm sure you've talked to some of these people, everybody's in AI now, right? So there's thousands of AI startups popping up all over the world because it became easy. You could hack together an AI app in a weekend now. Yeah. Right. Whereas before it would take you months and you had to go gather the data, you had to train the models, and the models might not be very good. And you got to go back to the drawing board and try something else and do it again. There were major barriers before, but just the tooling alone took you from 3,000 data scientists to roughly 100,000 data scientists.
Sure.
Now make it that much easier. And you're talking about, you have 1 million plus developers who are thinking in AI now. We want to do the same thing for Web3. And we want to take it from where it's at now, where it's very difficult, very expensive, and the lead time on building a prototype is really, really long. There is no such thing as rapid prototyping in Web3 unless you're forking something that already exists. If you're doing something innovative in the space, you're starting from scratch and you're chewing glass all the way down. And you may get there. You may get some funding because it is still a hot space and there's still dry powder that can go to work, but it's tough. So it takes a lot. And most people, and this is no offense to them, I agree with them in a lot of ways. Like, they don't want to go through that. They don't want to risk everything for something that's like a pipe dream. Yeah. Make it easy. Make it to where a couple guys can get together in a coffee shop in Silicon Valley and have an idea, and 2 weeks later they have a prototype.
Yeah. Okay. So let's dive a little bit deeper into how VRRB actually is hoping to solve what you just outlined. Like, how are you making prototyping easier, and where do you kind of fit in the stack? Because there's a million layers that, from creating something to actually getting it live. And where does VRRB fit in that?
Yeah, so layers is a great word because obviously we call these things layer 1, layer 2. Sure. So I'll start with how we're doing. I think going back, this unikernel technology, right? It's very powerful, and it's improved a lot. So this is not a new idea. This is something that originally kind of popped up in the mid 90s. Right. There just wasn't like a ton of use cases for it back then. Some people would use it on like private cloud, or what was called private cloud back then, basically like small scale data centers that serviced, an educational facility or whatever it was. So they've been around for a little while. They were very sort of black boxy. It was difficult to trace and do debugging. That's improved pretty dramatically over the years. They also sort of made a renaissance as a result of like AWS Lambda and functions as a service, and particularly when it comes to like IoT and the IoT movement. But then AWS released Firecracker, which was actually specifically built for AWS Lambda, that kind of supplanted unikernels there. So there's this idea that's been around. There's been some improvement on it, but this really kind of is like the perfect use case for it, because it does offer up the flexibility that we want in a very small package and allows us to ship it around pretty quickly and distribute it and make it very decentralized very, very quickly. So, and because of some of the restrictions you can build into what you're doing there and like how you build those runtimes, provides a degree of security that you wouldn't get with just your sort of traditional monolithic VM that you see in this space. So that's really the core of how we're enabling this. There's some other pieces in there. There's some dev tooling to make it easy for you to actually build these, and it's to actually make it Docker compatible specifically, and Podman compatible, so that you can literally use Docker and Podman, and you just change the runtime to our runtime, and you can build what you want to build with a Docker file and your source code. So just making the DevOps significantly better.
Well, yeah, and just the setup, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So
you
much
already
easier.
have it.
Yeah, you have it. Yeah.
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 So
interesting. Okay, keep going. Sorry.
Yeah. So no, that's a big part of it. I think it's also then about like getting the word out there. So going into where all of these various developers live, which we know where they live. There's a Python subreddit with 5 million members, a JavaScript subreddit with 8 million members, right? There's a Go subreddit with 250,000 members. We know that they're using ChatGPT. Let's build a plugin for ChatGPT to make it easier to get up to speed and educate yourself and tutor yourself and correct your code and all of that. And let's train that plugin on on the Verb docs and what that looks like. So that's really kind of like a full service, full stack developer experience improvement is what we're going after with that unikernel core sort of at the core of it, which is what enables it. It's not the only piece though. In terms of where we fit in, I think there's two different places where we fit in this space. One of them is as our standalone layer one, where things can be built upon that's a scalable, fast chain that enables much higher volume, much higher throughput. So for things like DeFi, this is really, really important. For, I think the DPIN movement, decentralized physical infrastructure network, we're really well suited to capture that world because of the sort of IoT device component of it and how unikernels have been historically really well suited for handling functions as a service and with IoT devices. Okay. So that's another area where I think, and then the third one is over time, moving this into more of like a decentralized general compute world, where you can do things like decentralized science, decentralized AI training. A lot of these things will be possible, not necessarily directly on chain, but off chain using the same compute stack and then proving some result on chain, right? So, and there's a bunch of different ways that you can do this. Right now, there's some other platforms that are doing this with like ZK proofs. I don't know if we'll use ZK proofs to do this, but there's a variety of ways that you could actually chew that off. So we do see that it going there in the future of more just general compute and what people refer to as a decentralized cloud, although not a huge fan of that language. Cloud is something very, very specific. It's centralized in a data center. That's what a cloud is. But I get the concept, like it's a good mental model, right? That you get the benefits of a cloud and a decentralized network.
Okay. So, and then I'm sure I know the answer to this, but I'm curious anyway, is how does a designer fit into this? Does it not matter? I can design whatever I want on top of this, obviously because of the programming language, or how does that work?
Yeah. So you can design and host decentralized front ends now too. Okay. Right. So you can deploy that front end as a unikernel that communicates with the blockchain as a back end, and it won't run. We don't need that front end to be run by every single node in the network.
Sure.
So it'll be run by a node. It'll have longer lifetime, a longer life cycle as it's running. And then when it's done running, it just shuts down. Right. But when somebody else wants to run it, it boots up. Boot times on unikernels are 3 to 40 milliseconds. They're lightning fast. Yeah. So we don't need it just sitting there running in the background all the time. So you're only paying as the designer or whoever's interacting with it, preferably you as the designer, but we can talk about economic models of how you want to accomplish this. You're only paying for the compute time where somebody's actually pinging it, right? Where somebody's actually using your front end.
Interesting.
So we can keep costs down for developers as well. And there's sort of some economic models here that we could, I don't know if we have the time to go into it on this one, but I think over time, we're going to actually be cheaper than AWS for that. So bringing that cost down across the board for any kind of hosting, for any kind of cloud computer, or in our case, decentralized compute, will actually be able to make it cheaper, because where Amazon kind of has to maintain that server over time, we have effectively independent business people running these nodes, right? Who they can compete on margin. They just need to squeak out a little bit of a profit and they're okay, and they'll do it. And then they can scale up their small scale compute offering. So there's a lot of benefits to this. And yeah, as a designer, right now, you don't have a lot of options for decentralized front end hosting.
No.
So, we want to offer that right now. A lot of dApps are sort of decentralized in name only. They have a decentralized component in their smart contract, but their front end is hosted on AWS. And if OFAC comes knocking and says, hey, you got to take this down, what's AWS going to do? They're going to take it down.
Yeah. They have no choice.
And so a lot of them do offer like a CLI, but most of their users use their GUIs. So you're going to expect 90% of people all of a sudden to become like CLI warriors and learn how to use the CLI to use your app. Like, it's not going to happen. We need to decentralize this space if we want to make it like, the old Bitcoiners, which I love about them. If we want to make it unstoppable, if we want to make this unstoppable and truly censorship resistant, we have to decentralize front ends for people to be able to access user interfaces that are friendly and are not at risk of being censored.
Interesting that I 100% agree. Like, I think that's the one thing that I find the number one complaint. Well, maybe not the number one complaint, but one of the complaints from the design side of Web3 is, look, let's be honest here. There's a bunch of ways you can do like a payment system or smart contracts. I'm talking just from like a look and feel flow wise, not from a coding perspective. Like, why can't I just say like, I want a payment system that's been user tested, that's been well designed, that drops in, that automatically puts everything on a blockchain, or I pick what I want on a chain so I can keep track of that because I need to for whatever business reasons, right? And why can't I just cherry pick like 5 or 6 modules, kind of slap them together, have a prototype, and then go from there, right? And so like that whole design layer is kind of missing from Web 2.0, but you can kind of get that. But from like 3.0, that I could just actually have the code, that it's not like a Figma file that I could just drop in, seems to be like a big kind of hole in the space. What are your thoughts around that? Am I out in left field on that?
No, you're not at all. I 100% agree. Right now, you basically have to you have to know how to build like a React app that taps into the different APIs that are offered, and and usually using some form of RPC, which is again like not the ideal scenario. I'm a big fan of like the Unix tradition, and the Unix tradition, they really always warned against RPC. We do use RPC. We use JSON RPC, so it's very text based. It's a lot easier to debug. And we are going to offer a direct web API. So Ethereum does have one. This is actually like, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but this was the first time I ever heard the term Web3, is that there's an API called the Web3 API that you use to tap into, that you can use to tap into the Ethereum network. So I don't know if that's where it came from. I would guess that was the first time I ever heard of it. So you can use that API, but then you still got to build everything else out around it. I've done it. It's kind of chewing glass. It's not the best experience. It's okay though. It's not terrible. The problem there really is just that like you're not actually using Web3 tools. You're just using Web2 tools and tapping into a Web3 API that gets you some information from the blockchain. That gets you access to a smart contract, that allows you, when you press a button, to transfer, that allows you to hook into various wallet applications or whatever it is. Right now, the wallet is kind of the center of Web3. And you need your wallet. You need to connect to a wallet if you want to use a Web3 app. I think we can abstract a lot of that away. I think we're not the only ones that are thinking of this. There's a lot of other platforms that are thinking about ways that you can abstract the wallet away, or make it more of like I've heard like, oh, the wallet is the browser of Web3. I don't know if that's the case. I hope not. I think that would be a poor experience.
That is,
I've heard others that say, oh, like the wallet's going to become the website in Web3. That makes more sense. There's one called Backpack, who I'm a big fan of. I know I've met the guys out in Chicago when I was at the pit. They're really smart. They had a really successful NFT launch recently. They're really gritty. Great story. If you ever want to have somebody who like has a great story on,
Yeah, totally.
I
Sure.
think that they lost like $14 million when FTX
Oh, wow.
collapsed, or
Right.
something like that. It was a big chunk of what they had raised, and like gritted it out and got to launch. So like really, I'm impressed by them. That's a very impressive story to me. I love those kinds of stories. So Backpack kind of is the first I've seen that really has like this feel of like it's actually more of like a website. Their focus were like executable NFTs, which you can click on and then something will happen beyond just the picture. So you could have a game on the back end of it. When you click on it, it'll load up this game. You can play the game. Some of them have like chat rooms that you can communicate with other holders of the NFT. So there's some really interesting things going on there. And I could see that happening, but I do think we need to abstract away this concept of a wallet and the wallet being the center of interacting with the chain, and find ways to embed, like you put it, like you want payments that are blockchain where the back end is a blockchain without needing a wallet, right? I want to click a button and I want to be able to send tokens or even just on ramp and send tokens. I don't need to know what's happening on the back end.
Flash don't care, really.
Right.
Arguably, I don't care. I just want it to work.
You just want it to work. Right. Exactly. And I agree with you 100%. I think there's debates going on. There's a lot of people who think you will know what blockchain you're using and it will matter. There's other people, which I'm more on the side of, that all of that stuff is going to be abstracted away. You're going to use an application. You may know that it's on a blockchain. You may care, you may not. The maxi culture that we have right now, I think, will be abstracted away. People will use different chains and move assets across chains, and it'll become a lot easier to do that over time. You'll use applications that do communicate with more than one chain. So I have no doubt that that's going to happen in the future. And it's already starting to happen. This is not something that's like way off in the future. This is people are already doing this and thinking about it. There are people who are like hardcore maxis who are like, no, that'll never exist. Like you'll know you're using Ethereum, you'll know you're using Solana. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think you don't know that you're using AWS, and I know it's not a one-to-one comparison. I get it, but you don't need to. Like, I don't know. We're on Google Meet, so there's like probably using Google, right?
Probably.
Likely, I don't think they're hosting Google Meet on AWS, but I don't know what Zoom is hosted on, nor do I care.
Yeah, you don't care. Well, and that's the other thing too, is I always explain, like, because people are like, oh, I don't think crypto is going to be a thing. It's like, whether just because it's going through a downtime, it's like, do you have a Starbucks card? Because like that is basically a cryptocurrency. You can use your card different locations across the country and the globe at different Starbucks locations. Sure, it's not, to your point, like it's not like a one-to-one comparison, but it's the closest thing that I can think of. It's like, that's
I'll give you a much better one.
Okay, sure, go ahead.
Have you ever tried to swap airline miles from one airline to another?
Well, it's not even possible, is it?
It is.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Pain in the ass, though.
I can imagine.
It's extremely difficult. If they're not affiliated, it becomes even harder. There are still ways that you can do it.
Okay.
This is a perfect example, right? Now, the one side of it is like we need some clarity from, at least here in the US, the US government, because airline miles are not taxable. So that becomes like a whole scenario. If they do that, they probably don't want to do that. There's some issues around it from a regulatory perspective, but if we could solve those, this is an obvious improvement in user experience. If I have United Airline miles, I want some American miles because I got to book a flight that's on American. Why can't I just swap those easily in a couple clicks of a button? There's no reason other than the fact that you can't. And blockchain enables this immediately. Like this is saying that if we got clarity from a regulatory perspective, within months, this would be realistic and would proliferate society. Every single store that you go to now has some form of brand loyalty points. Most of them you're never going to use. Why can't I swap them all into one that I'm going to use, and other people get the ones that they want to use? And between decentralized exchanges and the swap technology that's there and tokenization, this enables that almost immediately and would not take very much to do. I think we're particularly well suited to do it because of our technology, and porting over some of the existing infrastructure for all of those services to VRRB would be a lot easier than hiring a team of Solidity developers to do it. in Solidity. To your point about like your Starbucks card, Starbucks did do like a NFT based gift card or something like that on Polygon. It didn't go great, but imagine if your Starbucks points were tied to that. Now this is a different story.
Sure.
So and I do think there's ways to do like NFT gift cards. I don't know. I'm a big fan of sub sandwiches. I don't know what I'm saying. This is like, it's like a really good example of like where an NFT could have like really high quality utility. If you've got your favorite sub shop and they issue an NFT, and every time you remember, like the sub shops would give you like a card, and for the 10th one you get one free.
Yeah.
Right. So imagine if you had an NFT and you got a new feature, like your NFT got a new tattoo, or you got a hat, or you got like a different shirt, right? Or like some other thing that you could do. And on that 10th one, that 10th feature you earn, you get a you get a free sub or something like that. So there's all these ways that you can incorporate brand loyalty on chain in a much better way than what we do now. So I'm a big fan of that space, and it's coming. It's a matter of time.
Sure. Well, and do you think that just goes back to our conversation about the dev tools and the devs work? Like, there's not enough dev tools and devs working on these problems, because you're right. Like, it's not that hard to actually do, but if you don't have the people that understand the technologies to do it, well, it'll never get done, or it takes forever to get done.
Yeah, I think that's a huge chunk of it. I think another chunk of it is like the way a lot of these corporations work. Like you're talking, I think small business would probably be a better entry point for that. At a corporation level, a lot of they work through consultants.
Yeah.
So finding ways to work with the consultants to find preferred dev shops that they would work with to integrate it and all of that is probably how that would go. So it's just like there's bureaucracy in corporations the same way there's bureaucracy in governments. It's usually not quite as bad, but that's sort of what's holding us back right now, is that there's a way that you do things as a corporation. So, and then yes, a part of it is like, are we really going to trash all of this stuff that we built over the past 8, 10, 15 years? And our dev shop that we worked with, or like our internal dev team that built this, do we have to like fire them all and hire a new dev team? They don't want to do that. So making it easier for them where their existing dev team or the existing dev shop that they work with can actually accomplish this and do so in a timely manner will improve the probability that we actually land these kinds of use cases. I have no doubt about that. And we're working on that already. We're starting to try to have some of those conversations with the consulting firms and with the corporations. So there's a combination of, I think you got to take both paths. You got to talk to the corporations and the consulting firms and have a meeting of the minds there. So there's a biz dev component of it, but yes, the dev component of it itself is a barrier.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So I'm curious, where are you at in the VRRB development? Like, what can people actually start playing with right now today?
So as of right now, they can basically play with our GitHub. Our GitHub's completely open source. They can track it there. They can follow along there. We've got one more high level feature that we've got to complete before we launch our first test net.
Okay.
So that'll be within the next couple of weeks.
Okay.
I put my foot in my mouth a couple times saying it was going to be sooner than it actually ended up being. Something always comes up. As somebody who's deployed product before, I'm sure you know this.
Yes.
So we are very close. We're making a lot of strides. We're a small team. I can't speak highly enough about the guys on our team. They grind. They work late. Each one of them, when I hired them, I said, like, your goal should be to try to outwork me. It's never going to happen, but you should try. And I'll tell you, like, in some cases, they actually have. Like, it's pretty cool.
Well, that's awesome.
So, not most of the time. I still put my work in, but they're great. They love what we're building. There's obvious passion for what we're doing. So we'll get there pretty shortly here. And then in terms of a dev net where people can actually build on it, we're probably about 5 or 6 months away from that.
Okay.
So there's still some work to be done there. We'll probably have like an alpha or MVP version of it with like 4 or 5 languages enabled in August, but the actual full, like, that's opened up to the public will probably be 5, 6 months away. And then in terms of going live to mainnet, I'd say like the technology will be done sometime this year. In terms of when we actually go live to mainnet, that also depends on like what the ecosystem looks like. So if we boost up our ecosystem really quickly, it could be as early as like January, February next year. I expect and anticipate it'll probably be around this time next year.
Okay. So are you looking, like, obviously you have a team of people, can, like, open source, for lack of a better term for it, contribute to the development, or how does that kind of work?
100%. Yeah. If you're a Rust programmer, or you're building, or you're a TypeScript programmer, and you want to contribute to like some of our user interface stuff, if you're a DevOps guy and want to help us with our CI/CD, like, we absolutely 100%. We are 100% open source. You can come, you can either fork, or you can submit a pull request. 100%. Or it's an MIT license. If you want to just copy pasta it and work on something on your own off of it, you're welcome to do that as well. You have an open license to use our software. So we're 100% open source. We welcome open source contribution. We'd love more of it. We've had a couple of very small ones. I don't know that I think we still have some good first issues up on our GitHub. So that'd be sort of a place to start. But yeah, we welcome open source contributors and would love to have more of them. It'll be a big push of ours after we close this next round. We will have a bounty pool, and we'll be doing some small hackathons, virtual hackathons and stuff like that. We haven't done that quite yet, but that'll be a big effort of ours after we close this next round.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So I'm curious, because there's still a lot of kind of like doom and gloom right now in tech. What are your thoughts on the industry right now? You've kind of covered a little bit, but I want to get your thoughts as somebody's kind of in the trenches building this stuff.
It's a great time to build. Head down, focus on the product. Don't worry too much about the outside noise. So that's sort of at a high level what I think. I think that the way that we improve humanity is through tools. This has been the case since we first started walking upright, right? This is how humanity advances. It's how society becomes more productive, is that we build tools that make our labor more productive. I think AI is going to be a big part of that. AI, I view it as a tool. I'm not an AI doomer. I have a lot of friends who are, so they'll probably hammer me for this. I'm not at all. I think, yeah, I'd like put a guy with a jug of water next to the data center where you're hosting it, and if it goes rogue, pour the water on it. Like, there's ways to solve these doom and gloom problems pretty easily. I am a big fan of technology dramatically reducing the cost of living and dramatically increasing the productivity. I am not a Luddite in any way. I think we need more technology. I do think we're very adaptable as a species, and we'll adapt to it. Does it mean that some people will lose their jobs to automation? Yes. I also think it means they'll end up getting jobs that are much better suited for them, and where they're going to make more money and have more leisure time. That's the course of history. Throughout history, as we invent better and better tools, the amount of time people spend on labor goes down, the amount of money they make goes up, and the amount of time they get to spend with their family and their friends and enjoying sporting events and going to the beach and taking vacations goes up. That's a good thing. We want more of that. We want more people to be able to spend more time enjoying themselves. So that's where I see us going long term. Now, in the short term, I think there are absolutely economic headwinds. There's no doubt about it. Inflation is still very high. We're lied to about it by our own government because for political purposes. Everybody who goes shopping at the grocery store can see that inflation is going up. So that's a problem. We need to get that under control. I do think long-term crypto is one of the solutions to that. Moving away from government-controlled money is important. It's one of our missions. I think it's at the core ethos of crypto and needs to continue to be. You don't hear as many people talking about it anymore. I still think that that's important. So that will help, I think, long-term. In terms of like where I see the general tech industry going, I think it's going to become more fragmented. A lot of people think it's going to consolidate. I actually think the opposite is going to happen. It's going to become more open source. It's going to become more fragmented. It's going to become easier than ever before to become an entrepreneur in the tech space. Some of the things you mentioned about no code, AI being able to generate code for you, it's going to make it easier than ever to take an idea from zero to at least prototype or MVP And as a result of that, you're going to get more people who do go out on their own and try to start their own business. And that's a good thing. Competition will make all our lives better. So that's where I see it going. I don't see this trend of like consolidation to the largest companies continuing. There is one thing that I think, could derail that, and that's access to data. I think the big Microsoft and Google obviously have better access and are willing to pay more for data. And if we want to have open source trained AI, we need to find a way to compete with that if we want this fragmentation to continue to happen. So that's sort of the big moat that OpenAI has, that Google Bard will have, that other sort of big, large scale AI companies will have, is just the access to the data. But I think we can get 95% of the way there open source. So that's where I see this going. I think there'll be a lot more kind of like public goods mentality around technology and open source, which I think is a good thing. It'll make it a lot easier. I think moving away from sort of strict intellectual property and more towards open source is in our future, and will make the world a much better place as a result.
Oh, interesting. Very cool. But sadly, we're out of time. So how about we close with mentioning where people can get more information about yourself, VRRB, and any other links you want to mention?
Yeah, absolutely. So all my plugs, let's see. It's at VRRB Labs, VRRB Labs on Twitter. That's really sort of our hub. From there, you can find our website. Our website is vrrb.io. Go and check out our website. It's very, very cool. It's very different.
It is very cool and very different, but I'll leave it there. I won't spoil it for people.
Yeah, so go check that out. Once you're on our website, you can find links to our Telegram channel, which is open to the public. Join our Telegram channel. Our Discord is still currently private. There will be some announcements about that soon, but our Discord channel is still currently private. But if you're in our Telegram group, you'll get first access to our Discord channel. So go to our Telegram group first. Follow me on Twitter. It's at VRRB Founder. So at VRRB Founder, that's my Twitter. That's really kind of where I'm at. I do have a LinkedIn. I really don't use it very much. The Web3 space is mostly on Twitter. So that's mostly where I hang out. And then read our Medium posts. So Medium, it's medium.com/@VRRB-IO is our Medium. And we've got some great articles on there. We've got some sort of distillations of our white paper that make it a little bit more digestible. We're still working through that and working on that series. Had an op-ed go out through Blockworks on the 25th of May, which is today when we're recording this. So that was, I think that's a really good piece to read. It really kind of distills our vision for the future of Web3. Some similar concepts to what we talked about here, although we're able to go into a lot more depth here than you are in a 500-word op-ed. So I appreciate the opportunity, Kevin. This was fantastic. I had a really good time talking about all these things, both VRRB and like where we're going in the future. I think it's a really exciting time to be alive, frankly. I think we're going to have ups and downs. That's the nature of our species. But at the end of the day, I think we're going to be all better off 10 years from now than we are today.
I agree with you. Well, Andrew, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be on the show, and look forward to keeping in touch with you, and have a good rest of your day, man.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. Bye.
Thanks for listening. Please visit our website at buildingthefutureshow.com to join the free community, sign up for our newsletter, or to sponsor the show. The music is done by Electric Mantra. You can check him out at electricmantra.com and keep building the future.